Just exploring the third limb a little bit more. Obviously, we've been working on asana quite a bit for the past few weeks. And we'll just also, which I've already done, taking a look at the multifaceted approach to how we practice asana or the postures. Like I've mentioned before, the postures are very energetic. And we have to be very open and receptive to what the asana is giving us, as well as us trying to do the asana. And, you know, in the Yoga Sutras, there's very little explained about asana, or very little talk about the asana. But again, it doesn't mean that it's unimportant, but it's not the most important thing either. So some people place way too much importance on it, and others tend to diminish it like it doesn't matter. Like, oh, you know, you're just focused on the body, and oh, forget about all that stuff. But we do live in a body right now, in this reality, in this time and space. And asana would not be placed in the 8 limbs if it didn't have some importance to it. But it's the intention behind the work of asana. It's the sincerity. It's really the purity of what you're after that speaks more volumes. So in some schools of thought, of course, people always diminish the body and say, oh, it's unimportant and all this stuff. But again, it is the house that we live in for this time being. So I find it's important to take care of it while you're in it. It will not last forever. And sometimes people are obsessed with their bodies, which is unhealthy too. But it's always like the state of balance of respecting the body that we're in. And at the same time, maybe, you know, not placing too much obsession and importance on it. That's when certain ailments and things tend to come up. You know, for instance, even like physical and mental disorders, like eating disorders. I mean, to be honest, I've seen it run rampant in yoga. So, I can see it from a mile away. It's unfortunate at times, but it's also the journey people seem to be going through. So, and you have to keep in mind, when I was young, I was a cheerleader, which again, you know, it's like, even, you know, we would do these different types of stunts. We call them stunts, but like, you know, you couldn't be super heavy doing some of these stunts, but believe me, in cheerleading, I didn't see the amount of eating disorders as I do in yoga. In yoga, I see more, actually, than what I did when I was young in cheerleading. So, because sometimes we were more focused on being able to do what we can do. So we wanted to be healthy. We wanted to have energy, you know, which is interesting. So sometimes it's a bridge people have to cross to find balance. And sometimes people take things a little bit too far or whatnot. When it comes to the asana in the Yoga Sutras, oftentimes it's defined as a calm and comfortable seat. So is your posture calm? Is it comfortable? This is one reason why I was mentioning this, but I don't know if it was in one of the workshops yesterday with one of the groups, but it's one reason why maybe the last few postures might have a little bit more difficulty in it, right? That's one reason why maybe you'll stop at a certain point, get to that space of completion, not perfection, because that's up to somebody's opinion, but a certain level of completion and a steadiness and an ease to the pose before moving on to the next. And then getting a steadiness and ease to the pose before moving on to the next. And of course, when you learn a new pose, it doesn't always feel calm and it doesn't always feel comfortable. That's one reason why we have to practice. But if we have a huge block of poses that are not calm and comfortable, it can be like a little bit like self-defeating in the process. So that's why in the Ashtanga practice, we try to that those last few poses might be more the challenging poses. Then when we get some good completion and steadiness in it, then we work into the next. It's not a punishment to be stopped somewhere. Like some people kind of entertain these arguments, which is very strange. It's really a supportive, affirmative type of guidance because, this is the thing we have to keep in mind. And this is something I say many times. It's your body, it's your lesson. It's stop looking at what other people are doing to what frequency and what speed. It doesn't have anything to do with your inherent worthiness at all. And sometimes even some teachers or people talk in the space to make it that, and it's really strange. It's their own stuff. But it's not embedded in the method of practice. Again, even if someone, for whatever reason, had a condition and they weren't very supple in their body, someone could go really far internally, even in the asana practice, if they had the right internal space when they do the asana. So it's you can go far, even in a half primary practice, if you have the right depth in the poses that you're doing. But again, it doesn't make it wrong to want to explore other areas. It's always having that balance, right? That balance. And it's something that my teacher often says over and over again is steadiness. This cultivation of steadiness. So sometimes our own desires and our own mind stuff takes us outside of what we need to focus on in the moment and what challenges we have in the moment to set a good foundation to go further into other areas. Again, whether mental, physical, spiritual, energetic. We have to also understand when you do the asanas, we're working very, again, multifacetedly. So just because physically things are working slow doesn't mean that mentally there isn't some healing happening. Doesn't mean that spiritually there's not some healing happening. So there's many layers to our being that the asana context. So we have to also, maybe in the beginning it takes a bit of faith because we're kind of okay, I don't know where this is leading. But this is what makes yoga different than, maybe other traditional forms of exercise. It's more than exercise. There's more happening because we're also expanding our consciousness and our awareness through using our own physical body. Because this is something I've mentioned before, that you don't have to buy a body. You live in one. So we're using our own physical body as a tool to become more aware, more conscious, to become stronger, but also to become more sensitive, to work through resistance, to free up energy. Through some schools of thought, our unconsciousness lives in our physical body. So again, we bring what is unconscious conscious. So there's a lot of work in the asana that sometimes we miss as we get focused on just the performance only, or comparing ourselves to somebody else, or being obsessed to what speed that I'm, working the postures. I'm not saying that it's wrong to have enthusiasm around the practice. That's not what I mean. But sometimes we get into a grasping type of energy. So these are important things to keep in mind, that there's a lot of work, a lot of multifaceted work within the asana. And it can take you quite far consciously. And in the method of Ashtanga yoga, even in the practice itself, we touch upon many of the other limbs. And it's already embedded in the practice. But I've mentioned this before, the yamas and the niyamas are the foundation that we place our asana practice on top of. And when we're in alignment with the yamas and niyamas, the asana practice can work much more deeply. If we're out of the alignment of the yamas and niyamas, there's a lot of limitation to how deeply the asanas will work on us. Again, sometimes, we have to be careful too. The yamas and niyamas help to keep us in check because the ego can also grow quite strong in the asana practice too, if we're devoid of the yama and niyama. So that ego can really get strong if we're not in touch with the yama and niyama. Of course, sometimes we might fall off track, but that's what the yamas and niyamas are there for, to kind of keep us on track. Again, when we go counter to the yamas and niyamas, we tend to experience more suffering, more drama, more chaos. So it doesn't come necessarily from a condemning place. I think the other thing that's really interesting about the asana too is that, and especially how we practice in the Ashtanga method, in that there's just a lot of movement, and movement is really healing. Moving the body, being connected to the breath. There's something very healing about that. And I really feel like our bodies are meant to move. They're meant to move. And in modern culture, it seems like people are becoming more stagnant than ever. Maybe it's kind of out of my generation, but it just freaks me out, to be playing video games for hours on end. I'm just that's frightening to me. I'm oh my God, just sitting here and only the fingers moving. That can't be, I don't know. I don't want to judge or anything, but it just doesn't seem so healthy. But I did have a friend who, her son was addicted to video games, and it was quite a problem. He was just having food delivered to his door, and I don't think was even showering days on end. But that's how seductive it can be to certain addictive minds. It was a really crazy story, because they couldn't get a hold of him, and then they just finally, I think, kind of showed up at his apartment. And he was really going down that rabbit hole. But, not to say it's all bad, I'm not saying that, but our bodies are meant to move. And especially if you have work that is quite static, where you have to, sometimes we can't help it, and maybe we love our work and we have to sit at a desk for long hours. It's really important that you move, that you have a block of time to move your body, to clear your mind of, all the clutter that kind of gets collected from work. So again, it's the physical body is interesting too. There are some spiritual schools of thought that kind of diminish the whole physical body, it doesn't really matter, it's just like a shell. And in a way it is, but also it's also an interesting instrument, because this is something I've mentioned before, that your body will never lie to you. So that I find to be really interesting. Your mind will lie to you and rationalize and judge and project and blame and create all these stories. But the body will always tell you the truth. And that's what's interesting about asana practice. So, if you're receptive to it and you're sensitive to it, you'll just start to feel where things are locked up in the body. And again, you don't want to look at it with judgment, but just more with curiosity. Maybe the insight or the answers will come. Maybe they won't come right away. But as you become more receptive, you'll start to sense where all of that is coming from. And I find it really interesting. The same thing with your digestion, where, it is said that this is your second brain, where your digestion is. And even like I mentioned, your diaphragm is your second heart, which is very important with our breathing. It's another type of circulator in the body. So the body will never lie. And it's really interesting to kind of explore all of that, where all that unconscious energy is held, where stress is held in your body when you're a little bit agitated or anxious. What happens when you're a bit depressed? What can you do to take yourself out of those energies? And energy is so interesting because sometimes it's very hard to define. But I find that that's like a skill that continues, every day I practice and teach, every week, every month, every year. It's like an intuition that starts to grow. Like I start to feel energy inside of me, but I also sense energy in the room. Like I can sense things, with people. It's not necessarily through judgment, because judgment happens through here. It's more like, oh, you just sense like where people are holding, or you can sense there's some emotions there. It's really, reading energy is super interesting because we tend to get more stuck on definitions of things. We tend to get more stuck on labeling things, which tends to kind of like constrict what, this energy that kind of tends to meander around the space is. So I'm going to read some things too from, again, the same Yoga Sutra book that we've been citing in terms of asana, because through, various books that I've come across, Yoga Sutra books or translations, I should say, because the Yoga Sutras just are what they are, but through different translations, I really like how he uncovers and unpacks the asana and how he defines it in a very interesting, broad way that is not always articulated in this way. So posture, or asana, is the bodily aspect of Patanjali's holistic system. Here the term refers only to those postures suitable for prolonged immobility. So, in a sense, I'm pulling from, in the Ashtanga practice, we do many, many asanas. We learn many, many asanas to actually be able to sit still. Okay, which takes much more strength and concentration than people realize. So that's one reason why we learn so many asanas. So I mentioned, I think it was with group 1 yesterday that I remember very distinctly, practicing meditation, sitting, even sitting in discourse, sometimes I would feel my knees, or I would feel and then you're kind of like, oh, your body starts talking to you. But that does slowly dissipate. The longer you practice, you really can just sit and not feel but don't judge your body because you feel your knees. It's just what it is for the time being. But it is fascinating because I'm like, wow, the work really worked. When you can really just sit and the hips don't talk to you so much, the knees don't. But it takes a while. It takes a while to get there. It takes practice, of course. So strenuous, asymmetrical, intense, or ungrounded attitudes of the body would be unsuitable, since they tend to agitate the mind and cause fatigue. Asana traditionally refers as well to a seat or cushion used to support the body. I really like how he talks about ungrounded attitudes of the body would be unsuitable. So again, and that's another beautiful aspect of asana practice. Of course, sometimes we get very stuck on the performance and all this stuff, but just to become more grounded. And the thing that I love about asana practice, for me personally, the way that I, in a very simplistic way, I like to express it, is just feeling good in my own skin. Just feeling good in my own skin. And no matter, sometimes people are like, oh my God, how can you travel so much and be here? But of course I don't always feel great in my own skin, but it's just I find that seat within myself no matter where I am. You know what I mean? Like, no matter what country, no matter what place, I just try to find that seat within myself, which feels nice, you know? It feels nice. Like, of course, there's sometimes when we feel sick or tired or hungry, but just finding that seat within yourself. And sometimes it helps to alleviate the sense of impatience and anxiety. Like, you know, just like, okay, let me just sit here and like, just be in myself. I feel like that's the real power of asana, you know, like just feeling good in your own skin, feeling grounded. No matter where you are, you can just feel at ease, right? Now, at the same time, when you're in that grounded state, sometimes you can feel energy. Okay, it's time for me to exit. Let me get out of here. But it's not from a reactionary state. You just kind of like, oh, I'm not vibing with this energy. I can feel it quite clearly. Okay, it's time for me to step away. That too is a powerful aspect of asana. But again, it's not a reactionary thing. It's more of like, you feel, you assess, and you can choose. You can choose. And one reason why I like to bring all of these different like perspectives up in asana is sometimes we get really stuck in our minds when we come to our mats, like, oh, this isn't working, this isn't happening. But I always try to tell you there's a lot that can work. There's a lot working and going for you when you step onto your mat. Yeah, sure, sometimes your hips are not going to be working in the area you want it to go, maybe, but you know, we have to think long term. That always helps. But there's other things that are working for you when you practice. For most body types, a level of steadiness and ease commensurate with samadhi is hard to attain without such support. Okay, so again, this ungrounded attitudes of body would be unsuitable, for they agitate the mind and cause fatigue. So for most body types, a level of steadiness and ease commensurate with samadhi is hard to attain without such support. So that's quite interesting. So just having that support within yourself, being able to hold your energy. I think too, another great aspect of asana is that understanding, like, you can be very open to other people, but you also have a boundary too. Like, you also have a structure within yourself where, you know, it's kind of like that saying, like, be kind, but don't take bullshit. Don't take anyone's bullshit. You can do both. You know what I mean? So Buddha, a seasoned and highly accomplished yogi, bundled grasses into a comfortable and supportive cushion before sitting down to the contemplation that led to his awakening, some 6 or 7 centuries before Patanjali. And then, you know, that again is an interesting story of Buddha, like, sitting under the Bodhi tree, and he was just like, I'm just going to sit here until I become enlightened. So I'm not going to move. I'm not going anywhere. Of course, I'm giving you the cliff notes of that experience. But there were a lot of, the way I would explain it, but there's, you know, there were a lot of vrittis coming in. There was, like, you know, demonic forces like shaking the ground and like really trying to intimidate him. And he was like, nope, I'm staying in this zone. I'm staying steady. That's a high level, because again, like, that can be the other aspect of looking at asanas. Like, you can be in this chaotic environment, but are you going to get swept away, or are you going to hold your anchor and your energy? You know, like, that's something else. So, and another analogy I always like is, you know, like a hurricane or a cyclone, or you can sit in the eye of the storm. In the middle of that storm, it's calm. There's nothing happening, but the storm is all around. So your energy can be a little bit like that. That's something to think about also in your asana practice, like being in the eye of the storm. So even in the midst of a challenging posture, can you still find that center within yourself and still work into it? Of course, we always talk about the breath, like, you know, stay with your breath. That's really important for your concentration and a sense of ease, letting go of that acidity that can kind of be in the body as well. If it is to be a limb of Patanjali's yoga, asana must embody steadiness, sthira, and ease, sukha. Not only in an active external sense, as in selecting a posture and support best suited for profound stillness, but also in an interiorized way and receptive way. So not only externally, but internally. There should be that receptivity. Moment by moment, we must allow our awareness of embodiment to deepen. And that's another thing, like, even in the Ashtanga practice, even though we're moving a lot, you can move in stillness too and feel very still in the movement. That's a very high level too. Like feeling that internal stillness as you cycle through sun salutations, as you go through the standing sequence. Patanjali identifies two factors that bring sthira sukha about. The first is relaxation of even the subtlest bodily efforts, almost all of which arise subliminally from suffering of one cause or another, and which promote instability. Another way to think about it too in your own practice is just, let's get out of the tension. So sometimes people think relaxation is like I'm out by the pool and I'm just lounging. But no, that's not. You can be relaxed and still do a very active practice. But let's try to practice alleviating the sense of tension when we practice. But of course, sometimes it takes practice to get there. Because when we first start, all we feel is the tension sometimes. So asana is a window that opens onto some of our deepest personal conditioning and the suffering it generates. That's why, as a teacher, that's why I see some people lean in and some people run for the hills because of this statement right here. Because it opens our deepest personal conditioning. But again, the space that is facilitated is also quite important. I have felt like just so much, even sometimes when I've, blocked out a few months with my teacher, I felt like just so much healing, not only just physical, but the thing is but my teacher is not my best friend. We're not going to the bar together and getting drinks. No, it's just not like that. It's really like, it's a different type of relationship. Yeah, so it's like, and what I like too, in that, it's not necessarily that it's an energy to create intimidation, but like when he walks into the room, I kind of stand a little bit straighter. I'm a little bit more attentive, which is good. It's just kind of like, okay, like I'm a little, it's not like I'm just kind of like, oh, it's like, it's really like, it's that type of space. You're a little more attentive. You're a little bit more aware. But that, hopefully, that can lead into other areas of life too, where you are giving attention to things. Are you adding value or are you taking away? That's an interesting thing to be aware of. So I'll just repeat that statement. Asana is the window that opens onto some of our deepest personal conditioning and the suffering it generates. But this is liberation. Like some people might hear this statement like, oh, I don't like that. No, this is liberation. So sign me up. Give me more of that, even though it's not going to be easy. In order to relax into things as they actually are, one must surrender every last drop of the internalized desire to feel good. This statement can also be misinterpreted. It's not necessarily that we have to do our asana practice on a bed of nails and make it worse than it is. But sometimes we come to our mats with this expectation, oh, I need to feel good. I need to it's like, well, that was what's so funny. Like this past year I had a retreat and I asked this woman, she didn't show up to the morning practice, oh, where were you this morning? And her answer, I mean, I guess I have to give her props for being honest, but she just looked at me and said, well, I didn't feel like it. And I was like, wrong answer. Which is like, why are you here? Like, first of all. But again, I've said this before. If I didn't show up to class to teach and I said, well, I didn't feel like it, would I impress all of you? Maybe not. So she didn't impress me at all with that answer. Of course, sometimes people are sick and like, I understand those types of things. Like, but like, just like, I didn't feel like it. I'm like, well, don't waste my time. Like that's the thing. But I, as a student, I don't just, because I don't feel, I'm like here to do something. And and even if you pay for the classes, I still feel like I just have to show up. Like, I'm not gonna like come into this space halfway. But that's just in my personality. But then it's funny, you just kind of let that go. But then again, it was like, it didn't surprise me because one time it was so funny, like when I think about it now, like the next Mysore class, like, I was kind of like attending the students. And as soon as I like turned my back, like she snuck out. Like she snuck out of the class. I was just like, the gall of this person. And of course, it's like, at that point, I'm not interested anymore. So go ahead and sneak out. Like, I'm not interested in, I'm not going to expend more energy in your direction. Like, I mean, and God bless this person, like I don't mean like anything negative, but just also like, what age are we now? Like, I'm going to sneak out when she turns her back. Like, I just kind of like was a little bit amused by it all. But again, that type of thing probably bleeds into other areas of life. But I've had other students like, oh my God, I'm really feeling sick. And they'll just at least talk, come face to face with me. I have to cut it short, and I'm gonna leave. And then, yeah, that's cool. Like, I get that, but it's like, let's have a conversation, like confront this, like, but this type of, but again, how we show up in different spaces really shows us like, kind of like who we are. And sometimes, that's what I've learned too. Like there's a certain energy and a discipline in the space. Even when I practice with my own teacher, like you just can't throw your stuff everywhere. You just can't, like there's certain, and it keeps everyone attentive and it kind of elevates the space when that's, a vibe in the room or in the shala. Another way to look at this is when you step onto your mat, we have to just also release our expectations because sometimes it is going to be challenging. Like sometimes some old emotions are going to come up, and it is for our liberation though. A storm might come, but hopefully it'll be worth it. And if we release those expectations, the real work can start to flow. That desire is shaped by our most cherished ideas about what constitutes good and bad, as well as by ingrained organic perceptions of pleasure, pain, and neutrality. So again, there's a bit of that raga and devesa, that attachment toward pleasure, the avoidance of the uncomfortable. It's a lot of mind stuff. The second factor is the arising of coalescence, which dissolves the ongoing stresses of wanting, aversion, egoism, and the clinging to life by stripping them of their seeming substantiality. So those are the kleshas, right? Avidya, ignorance, abhinivesa, clinging to life. As effort descends to effortlessness, one can see the relationship between the body and the rest of consciousness more clearly. So again, in a way, like the body is like a reflection of something internally. When we sit, many of the body's micro movements are just the outward manifestation of our reactivity. So this can happen in meditation, but this is also why we have these vinyasas. I mean, I can see some people like roll their eyes at me like, oh, and I'm like, okay, let's stay on the vinyasa here. But again, it's not just about like, oh, I have to be dogmatic, but I'm trying to like, let's move out of these tendencies we tend to generate. Like, some of us tend to be too aggressive at times. Some of us tend to be a little bit too procrastinating and lackadaisical and lethargic. Like, you know, it's different points of resistance. And that, you know, trying our best. Of course, some things we have to adjust. So I'm not trying to say that we don't have to be robotic. I mean, that's not what I'm trying to say. But it's what I do find interesting is those times that I've really had to like stay on these. It's like it is actually quite. You get into this meditative action and this flow, and it does feel quite liberating, and certain insights come up, which are quite interesting. When we sit, many of the body's micro movements are just the outward manifestation of our reactivity and the deepening physical stillness of asana, an embodiment of the placidity of consciousness's surface. So again, sometimes if we can like iron out some of that agitation, it's like a reflection of like what our consciousness can start to also become. As it calms, the surface of consciousness becomes mirror-like. And all things, subject, object, and perceiving itself, are equally reflected. No essential difference can now be detected between pain and pleasure, internal and external, self and other, or other dualities. In another way, that's really an experience of oneness. Likewise, the body and the external world, which usually feel like different things, owing to the way the self-sense sets the body apart from the rest. I mean, this is really a high level. No essential difference detected between pain and pleasure, internal, external, self, and other. That's like, that's really like, but I would probably guess to say that state, there's nothing that tastes sweeter than that, like that right there. Long periods of immobility are generally required for these factors. Relaxation of psychosomatic effort and coalescence in samapatti, to access and stabilize the subtlest parts of ourselves. As sensations, thoughts, and feelings evolve over minutes or hours of sitting in stillness, one cannot help but encounter unexpected new levels of intensity or restlessness. So as not to be overwhelmed by aversion or doubt, one must continually exert abhyasa, of course, practice, the subtle effort of returning to relaxation and coalescence. Or, habit in everyday life is to shift our weight, I said that wrong. Our habit in everyday life is to shift our weight, scratch, intellectualize, or otherwise respond to unwelcome internal experiences with some sort of evasive action, usually subliminal. And I mean, that's quite interesting too, like our habit in everyday life to shift our weight, scratch, intellectualize, or otherwise respond to unwelcome internal experience with some sort of evasive action. I mean, I always find it interesting too, like sometimes just our dialogue around practice can be interesting, like this intellectualizing it. It's just like, oh, you didn't get it. You didn't get it. It's like, it's a feeling, it's an energy. But once it goes in here and gets locked up, it's like, it's changed. As stilling deepens, one might question whether it is ever skillful to make adjustments to the body. To truly let go of effort, it is helpful to respond occasionally to the inevitable shifts that occur as the neuromuscular system loosens its grip on the skeleton and respiratory system. At these times, gently stacking the bones more vertically will actually allow effortlessness to deepen. So again, your alignment. So that's another, like sometimes people make alignment into a dogmatic thing or like some type of perfectionism, but when we stack the bones in a certain way, we can then relax too, okay? We can allow effortlessness to deepen. But again, sometimes it takes practice to get those bones stacked. There might be some resistance. Effortlessness instills a unique sense of freedom. As we relax, awareness begins to differentiate between the willed contractions of wanting or aversion on the one hand, and the spontaneous unwilled movements of energy that form the backdrop of being. Most of our active movements are learned, conditioned behaviors along well-worn neuromuscular routes adapted for the specific purpose of grasping at the pleasant or pushing away the unpleasant. Stillness is a reflection of our growing openness to the unpredictable unfolding of the world as it is.
Can you just repeat that? Stillness is a reflection?
Yes. Stillness is a reflection of our growing openness to the unpredictable unfolding of the world as it is. So really, it's like that's the other power. Like we've mentioned this earlier with the power of asana is like sitting within yourself. I mean, the world can do as it does. It doesn't mean you have to disengage from the world, but you can kind of sit in that anchor within yourself. Or you can get pushed out to sea, or you can get like thrown by the tsunami of everyone else's, stuff. And it takes a bit of confidence. Sometimes there's just certain things. I don't care if everyone is gonna turn left, I'm gonna go right. I don't care. If it feels right to me, that's what I'm doing. You guys go there, I'm gonna be over here. But when you really get in tune with yourself, you don't care. You don't have to win the popularity contest, and you can do it quietly too. It's not that you have to be like, hey, I don't like all of you over there, I'm going over here. It's not like, it doesn't have to be like that. You can do it quietly, I'm just gonna be over here, it feels good to me. But that's the part of sometimes it does feel solitary. It can feel like a solitary path and but in time, the right people come. As your vibration increases, as your frequency heightens, it's like things will drop away and things will come. And you have to be willing to let things come and go. But once you're there, I mean, there's no turning back. I'm not going back there. No way. Once you taste it, you're like, mm-mm. But it is true. That's the other part of awareness and consciousness. Sometimes you reach a point where you really start to know in your bones, there is no turning back. There's no way. Maybe that's why some people are hesitant to take the step. So this can extend far beyond the sitting cushion. Our growing familiarity with subtle internal experiences help us to recognize the ways our body-mind contracts in the presence of hurt, delay, desire, and other features of daily life. We begin to catch ourselves earlier in the process of tightening, vice-like, around difficulty, disagreement, or frustration. So we'll start to feel the impulse so we don't have to fall into the reactivity. We can then relax, noting how this embodies the intention to know the moment more clearly and openly. Nor is it ever wrong to do so. We begin to sense. So it goes back to what I mentioned earlier too. even the instrument of the body, you just start to sense, you start to have the sensitivity, and you can choose instead of getting swept away into reactivity. And you can start to feel like sometimes, like, you know, maybe there's an uncomfortable conversation or an argument. You can feel the tightening and the defense, and then you can, like, okay, that's one reason I've learned this with some asanas, like to relax in some difficult asanas and to breathe. Some asanas make your heart beat more quickly. It creates a little bit of a stress response. But you'll notice that in some encounters, you'll feel the stress response like come up internally. But if you can read it and be like, okay, and you can tell yourself internally, relax, breathe. I mean, I've had that happen to me before. Like sometimes like the heart is like, boom, 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 and I'm like, okay, let's stay in check. Let's not get swept away by this energy. It's always good to see the all-encompassing work of the asana. You know, of course, there's beauty to the movement, and there's excitement in the challenge of, the challenge of a posture, and reaching milestones, and feeling your potential, things that you didn't think you could do. Now you feel that you can do them. That's all great, and that's all good too. But I think what makes the practice long-term and sustainable is also understanding all these other factors and how it changes how you navigate life, how you sit within yourself. And it gives you a different type of confidence. It's not an arrogant confidence. It's like a confidence that can be quiet and can also be powerful at the same time.